There are a lot of people who believe that it'll be at least another 10 years plus before internal combustion engine vehicles are mostly replaced by battery electric vehicles. They couldn't be more wrong. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Before I go into the main story for this video, I want to make a note that Geoff Hinton, who, if there is any single figure who is sort of the father of modern neural network-based AI, including the invention of backpropagation and stochastic gradient descent, it would be Geoff Hinton, who until recently was at Google. He recently tweeted that he was quitting his job at Google, and it was not over some beef with Google itself, but rather so that he could warn us of the dangers of AI and how fast it's moving without reflecting on his company. So kudos to him for doing that because he's following his principles. Anyway, I put out a tweet that said I would love to have him and Jan LeCun, who is a very famous proponent of continuing on with AI as quickly as possible. I would love to host them in a roundtable together, or you could call it a debate if you want to, about the pros and cons of continuing AI apace. Anyway, if either of you or both of you would like to join me on this channel, please do let me know. Direct message me, and I'll be happy to set it up as quickly as possible. All right, so on to the main story. This is, I think, primarily for my United States viewers more than anybody else, because that's the region where I see the most comments saying that internal combustion vehicles will be sold for a very long time. But what I want to talk about here is the backside of the law of scaling, and it's what I call the tyranny of descaling. And specifically, of course, we all know that the more objects you make, widgets, whatever it is, the more of these things you make, the cheaper you can make them because you can get laws of scaling. You can order more stuff, you can pay less for all of the elements you put in, the labor costs get amortized over more and more things. Well, the opposite of that happens. As you make less and less of those things, you can get fewer and fewer component parts coming in. Those start to cost more money. The labor cost per device made, per widget made, goes up. And so while the cost curve nicely comes down as you make more and more things, whatever that is, the cost curve goes right back up again as you make fewer and fewer of those. And that is what's going to happen to internal combustion engine vehicles. And China is the linchpin of this tyranny of descaling. So let me explain a little bit further. So as you might know, over the past decades or so, somewhere around 80 million new vehicles are sold per year. It varies. Of course, it went significantly down during the pandemic and the chip shortage, etc. And it's actually stayed rather depressed. And that in its own right is a telling sign. But that's kind of the baseline of where we're coming from. The big deal here is that the largest player in the world, the largest car market in the world, is China. And it's also the place where many of the least expensive vehicles are manufactured in the world as well, and then they're exported around the world. And so what's happening in China is critically important to the future of the automotive industry. So if you look in the United States, only somewhere around 5.5 or 6% of all new vehicles in 2022 were battery electric vehicles. So it's a relatively low percentage. And I think people in the US are thinking like, oh, 95%-ish of the vehicles being sold every year are gas vehicles. So of course that's going to stick around for a very long time. But of course in Europe, that's a double-digit percentage approaching 20%. And even more critically, in China, nearly 1/3 of vehicles produced in 2022 were battery electric vehicles and or plug-in hybrid vehicles, which I know don't really count. But anyway, in terms of the transition, they actually do, because they're moving us away from traditional gas engines. So most recently, around 1/3 of the vehicles sold in China are electric vehicles as opposed to traditional gas vehicles. On top of that, if you layer the economic crisis that's going on in China at the moment, and the fact that as of July, internal combustion engine vehicles, many of the models of internal combustion engine vehicles will be prohibitively expensive in China as of July. And as a consequence, there are hundreds of thousands of them sitting in parking lots, etc. According to Sam Evans, the Electric Viking, I have not checked these numbers myself, but I trust him. He's very reliable on this kind of thing. But anyway, there are hundreds of thousands of these vehicles that have already been manufactured by ICE car manufacturers that are just sitting there, and they're being sold at very reduced rates to try to get rid of them prior to this law taking effect in July. And then of course, China is a bit of a wild west in terms of the automotive market, as opposed to most of the rest of the world where it's pretty staid and you just have your traditional automakers, and Tesla has come in by itself and disrupted that whole thing. And then there are very small players like Rivian and Lucid, etc. In China, there are literally, I think, about 100 electric vehicle vehicle makers, which is pretty crazy. And most of them are going to go out of business. But the effect of that is that the competitive landscape in China is extremely large for EV manufacturers. And they're working very, very rapidly to try to take market share and to improve their vehicles as quickly as possible in order to make them super competitive. And they're actually not all that worried about making money right now. They just want market share. So they're actually willing to sell these cars at loss leader prices and actually lose money on these electric vehicles in order to sell them in large enough quantities that their company gets well enough known that they can then become a major player in the Chinese market. And if you didn't know, one of the largest players in China, BYD, as of March has stopped producing gas cars. So they're only producing electric vehicles at this point. So everything in China is moving very, very rapidly towards EVs. And as the price wars are continuing and these people are eating each other alive in China, and there's a bad economy in China at the same time, so they're having very difficult times selling their vehicles in there. And by the way, kudos to Tesla for still selling their cars at reasonable prices in China. It's a brutal landscape there right now. And the fact that Tesla is still selling at the high end at the prices that they're asking, even though they're a lot less than they are in the rest of the world, that's an amazing thing that they're able to do that. But anyway, as this is going on, you're seeing the Chinese auto manufacturers eyeing the rest of the world and Europe in particular and going, wait a second, we can sell these cars for like double what we're selling them in China. And even though we have to pay tariffs and shipping costs and stuff like that, that looks really good to a lot of these players. And they're starting to push as many vehicles as they can into the European market. And of course, Europe is very far ahead of the curve compared to the United States, where they've got close to 20% electric vehicles in their market already. And China is trying to push in from the low end and start to sell as many vehicles as they can there. So now let's look at this from internal combustion engine vehicle manufacturers like GM, Volkswagen, Ford, et cetera, et cetera. These players are looking at the landscape right now. They can still sell a lot of cars in the United States, but they manufacture a lot of their cars in China and the Far East to export to the rest of the world. And in the past couple of decades, China has been their major profit driving center. All of that stuff is drying up simultaneously. They're not able to produce cars in China as cheaply as they could. They can't sell them in China anymore. And you're going to see a weird dip. You're going to see a dip in electric vehicle uptake in the next couple of months because internal combustion engine vehicles in China specifically, because internal combustion engine vehicles are going to be so dirt cheap ahead of this law change that people are going to be purchasing them, because why wouldn't you? If you can get what's effectively a $40,000 car for $12,000 or $15,000, then yeah, it kind of makes sense to do that. That's a pretty good economic move, even if it is a gas car. And I have to admit that I would probably do that as well. So anyway, we're going to see a weird little hump in the uptake, but as of the end of this year, it's going to return to the normal sort of pace. And you have to remember that these cars that are sitting in parking lots right now have already been sold by internal combustion engine vehicle manufacturers, right? Those things are not still in their inventory and they will still make some money back. They've already sold that. That's already on the books. That's already in the dealership's hands. And so these guys aren't going to make any more money out of those vehicles. And how are they going to push more ICE vehicles into that market when you've got hundreds of thousands of them sitting there waiting to be sold? So anything they produce now has nowhere to go, which is having the consequence of many of these legacy vehicle manufacturers pausing or slowing down their workforce and looking for people to retire and things like that. So you're already starting to see the consequences of this ripple out. But basically moving forward from now, it's going to be very difficult to sell an internal combustion engine vehicle in China from anyone, Chinese manufacturers, the rest of the globe, European, American, etc. So that entire market is drying up for ICE cars. And that is huge. And that is today, right? It's not the next couple of months. It's not the next 6 months. It's not the next year. It's today. And guess what? If you don't sell your widgets, right? If Apple's like iPhone sales, even if they had the market share lead or something like that, if they had that and for 1 quarter they sold 0 iPhones, it wouldn't matter if they had the market lead because they are not selling any phones at all at this point. So you need to continue to sell or else your debt increases and you're not making any revenue. And so you're in a horribly contractive situation where the only way to stay afloat is to fire as many people and close as many factories as possible. And hey, guess what happens when you fire people or let them go or let them retire? fire and you close factories down and you reduce the number of internal combustion engine vehicles that you make, you start to get the tyranny of descaling. So if you previously built 10 million internal combustion engine vehicles per year like Volkswagen or Toyota, and now suddenly you're only making 8 million the next year and 6 million the next year and 4 million the next year, and it just falls off a cliff. Those things don't still cost, let's just say they're $100 a piece to produce, and I know that's way too small, but just for, for a number, an arbitrary number to throw out, if they're $100 to produce at 10 million each, they're not going to be $100 each to produce at 6 million a piece. They could be $150 or $200 per engine to produce. So in other words, it's not staying flat. Your cost to manufacture all of these parts goes up as you produce less of them. So just at the same time that it goes down as you produce more and more of them, it goes up as you produce fewer. And in China, nobody wants gas-powered cars anymore. They want electric vehicles. And if people do still want gas-powered cars, they can get them super cheap because they're just sitting in parking lots. So that's nothing that these legacy vehicle manufacturers can sell into. They also can't produce them very effectively in China anymore because fewer and fewer of them are being demanded in the most major market that exists, and therefore the cost is going up. And even if they can produce them in the United States and Europe and other places around the world, the cost is going to go up because, again, if you produced 10 million of these things previously and you only produce 7 million now, the cost is not flat per car. It actually goes up per car. So you have to sell your cars at a more expensive price in order to maintain the same profit margins. And you know what happens if you have to raise your prices on old legacy type of vehicles and the newer electric vehicle manufacturers can sell theirs for flat or less? Your cars end up costing more than the competition's cars. And how do you sell those when you have a better vehicle that's an EV vehicle as opposed to an old internal combustion engine vehicle that costs more money as a sticker price? And already the Model Y is cheaper than the average cost of a new car in the United States. So we're already hitting that point, and the Model 3 is substantially cheaper than the average cost of a new car in the US. And just wait until Tesla's Model 2 and even cheaper models coming out of China really hit the market around the world. That's going to be devastating to these companies. They're going to sell fewer and fewer and fewer of these cars. And that means that every car they produce is going to have to be sold at a higher price in order to be profitable still. And even beyond that, the knock-on effects are going to be that gas stations and service centers and part centers and things like that are going to begin to close down. And what you can still get is going to cost more money. So again, as you mine for and drill for less oil and oil products, the cost of oil is going to go up over time. It's not going to happen immediately. There's going to be a glut and there's going to be a dip in the near term. But over the next few years, it's going to rise. And as a less and less demand for oil comes about, initially it's going to be flat and down, but then it's going to go way up. I mean, imagine trying to get something like a VHS player or something like that, right? When they first came out, I remember this because I'm old enough, they were like $1,000 or $2,000 for the VHS players where you'd stick the tape in and it would go like that and play a movie or something. And the movies themselves were like $80 a piece. It was crazy. But then they got down to where they were like $15 and a bank would give it to you if you opened a checking account or something like that. So they got very cheap. And that's essentially what's going on with oil. Between subsidies and the fact that so many people demand oil and they drill so much of it, it gets amortized over a large number of people requesting that. But just like with a VHS player, at this point, it's expensive to get one because nobody makes one anymore. And so you have to go on the used market and you have to pay, kind of exorbitant prices for used VHS players. Just like that, eventually oil and especially the parts for internal combustion engine vehicles are going to rise in price very steeply. And there are not going to be very many service stations and there won't be that many gas stations. And so you're going to start also getting range anxiety because you'll be worried about taking a gas car on longer trips because you won't know if there's going to be a gas station somewhere. So all of this stuff is going to compound, and it's going to compound exceptionally quickly. And that's what people don't understand. First of all, they don't understand exponential growth, and really electric vehicles at this point are only held back by the fact that we can't manufacture enough good ones fast enough, because if they were available at the prices that they would be at as you continue to make more, Wright's law comes into play, and every time you double it, I think if I'm remembering correctly, ARK Invest says every time you double the number of EVs manufactured, you reduce the cost by about 28%. So it doesn't take that long to go from 2 million to 4 million to 8 million electric vehicles, and each time the price keeps dropping. And internal combustion engine vehicles vehicles, on the other hand, are going to start sliding up. They've been relatively flat, but they're going to start going up because of the tyranny of descaling. And so fewer of these vehicles are going to be made because fewer people want them. As you make fewer, they cost more money. As they cost more money, you have to sell them for more money, which means that people are going to look at the sticker price, and even those who might be interested in purchasing that vehicle are not going to, because they're going to go, that's too pricey, which means that you're going to sell fewer, and the whole process is going to repeat in a negative cycle over and over and over again until they're just going to be sort of like toys. Yeah, eventually they will sell a few of these cars at very, very high prices, and it will cost you a lot of money to go to the gas station, and there'll be like a couple per city. There'll be a couple of gas stations per city, and you can go there and you can fill it up and you can drive around and you can pay a ton of money because you're polluting the environment, and there's governmental regulations and stuff like that. That will happen later. But in the near term, over the next 3 to 5 years, these things are going to become so expensive that it's just going to get stuck in this vicious cycle of nobody wanting to purchase the vehicles. And as fewer and fewer of them are made, they cost more and more money, which means that less and less people are going to want to buy it. And then less and less people are going to want to buy the gasoline that they have to use to fill that up. Less and less people are going to go to get service for those vehicles. And that stuff is all going to also compound and cost more and more money. So if you live in China, you're probably seeing this happening in real time right now. If you live in a place like Norway or something like that, you probably also are seeing it happening in real time. If you live in Germany, you're seeing it happening, etc. If you live in the US or Canada or maybe Central America or something, you might think like, this is never going to happen. But I'm telling you that what's going on right now in the other parts of the world are going to directly impact the cost of these vehicles in the US. So even if you want to purchase a gas vehicle in a few years, it's in the United States or Canada or Mexico or whatever, it's going to cost so much money to do that it's going to be kind of crazy for you to do that. And most people, obviously there will be people who will just be like, you can take my diesel truck out of my cold dead hands. But most people are going to opt for the more economical solution. And then of course, if Tesla does solve the robotaxi problem, they're going to have driverless vehicles that will cost even less money for people to utilize than owning a car. So that will be another advantage, and that's another disruption on top of that. So if you think in the US or Canada, etc., that you're going to be purchasing a new internal combustion engine vehicle in maybe 2028, it's not going to be that long again. But if you think you're going to be purchasing a new ICE vehicle in 2028, 2029, unless you want to pay an outrageous amount of money for it, you're not going to be. You're going to be purchasing a battery electric vehicle, not a gas vehicle. So while I have to say I'm not a financial analyst, you should do your own research, etc., etc., I am strongly encouraging you, if you own stock in GM, Ford, Volkswagen, Toyota, Nissan, whatever, if you own stock in these companies, you should take a serious look at what I'm talking about and make a decision about whether you want to continue to own that stock. And if you're thinking about buying an internal combustion engine vehicle, even today, you have to remember that you're going to have to sell that thing back into the market in 5 or 6 years when you're done using it. How much is that car going to be worth then? How much is gas going to cost then versus how much it costs now? Are people going to want to buy your car at that point, or would they rather purchase an electric vehicle? So you need to consider this, whether you're a stock owner or whether you're somebody who's considering buying a car in the next 6 months or a year. In either case, I highly recommend that you keep in mind what I'm talking about here. Do your own research and think about it yourself, but I think you'll come to the same conclusion I am, and that is that it's not going to take very long at all before internal combustion engine vehicles are completely uncompetitive, and you should really consider owning stock in those companies or purchasing a new internal combustion engine vehicle in the next year or two. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it, and of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As I said previously, I will be doing another AG1 sponsored video in May, and I would love to hear your stories about using Athletic Greens AG1. Let me know in the comments what your experience has been like, and I might post your comment in the next video. As always, a huge shout out to my Patreon members and my YouTube channel members. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. You all make this possible. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.